You are standing at a grave. It might be a cemetery plot with a marble headstone, or a small mound of earth in the woods, or a hospital room where someone you loved stopped breathing. And in that moment, something takes over. You cry. You wail. You want to touch the body. You want to stay close. You cannot explain why. You just know that leaving feels wrong. That is not weakness. That is not irrationality. That is one of the oldest programs in the human nervous system, running exactly the way it was designed to run. And its origins go back much further than you have ever imagined. Grief is not a malfunction, it is a ritual. And the way your body responds to loss today is almost identical to the way your ancestors responded to loss 100,000 years ago. The science of that continuity is stranger and more beautiful than any story you have ever been told about death. Start here. Grief did not begin with language. It did not begin with religion or funerals or flowers placed on caskets. It began before any of that. Archaeologists working at a site called Cima de los Huesos in northern Spain found something extraordinary. Deep inside a cave system, in a shaft that required deliberate navigation to reach, they found the skeletal remains of at least 28 early humans. Homo heidelbergensis, a species that predated Homo sapiens by over 400,000 years. They were placed there intentionally, carefully. One of them had been buried with a single pink quartzite hand axe, a tool too fine to be practical, never used for cutting, possibly placed as an offering to something no one can name anymore. Researchers Juan Luis Arzuaga and Ana Gracia Tellez, who have spent decades excavating this site, believe this was not disposal of the dead. This was ceremony. This was the first known funeral in human history, and it happened before your species existed. So when you feel the pull to do something at a funeral, to bring flowers, to light a candle, to say something out loud, even when no one can hear you, you are not following a social script invented in the last few centuries. You are following an impulse that is older than language itself. Your nervous system has been rehearsing grief for 500,000 years. Now go deeper, not just into time, but into the body. When you lose someone, your brain does something that researchers once found deeply baffling. It does not simply register absence and move on, it searches. Psychologist John Bowlby, whose decades of work on attachment theory reshaped how psychology understands human bonding, described grief as a biological protest against separation. He argued that the pain of grief is not a response to death specifically, it is a response to loss of proximity. Your brain evolved to keep you close to the people you depend on. When that person disappears, the brain runs a search protocol. It looks for them in familiar places. It replays their voice. It reaches for the phone to call them before remembering. This is not confusion. This is your mammalian attachment system doing its job, a job that was never designed to accommodate permanent loss. Because for most of evolutionary history, permanent loss was rare enough that the search protocol worked more often than not. The loved one who wandered too far came back. The one who fell in a hunt was found. Permanent death, from illness, from old age, from violence, yes, it happened. But the overwhelming evolutionary logic was search, and you will often find. So the brain kept that program running. It was adaptive. It kept families together and communities intact. And then something shifted. Humans developed consciousness complex enough to understand permanence, to grasp fully and painfully that this person will not come back. And the search program, already ancient and deeply wired, had nowhere to put that information. So it kept running anyway. Ancient humans did something remarkable with it. They built rituals that gave the search somewhere to go. Consider what happens in almost every grief tradition across human history. The body is kept close, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. In ancient Egypt, the mummification process lasted 70 days. Mourners stayed near the body, spoke to it, fed it symbolically, perfumed it, dressed it in linen. The dead person was not treated as gone, but as present in a different form, a form that still required attention, still required care. In many indigenous traditions across Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas, the dead are not buried immediately. There is a waiting period. a transitional time that acknowledges the nervous system's need to adjust slowly rather than all at once. Scholars like anthropologist Robert Hertz, writing in the early 20th century, observed that secondary burial practices, where remains are moved, re-cleaned, or reinterred after months or years, were extraordinarily widespread across unconnected cultures. Different languages, different climates, different cosmologies, yet the same instinct. Do not rush this. The dead deserve time, and so do the living. This was not coincidence. This was the human brain's protest instinct being channeled into extended ceremony. The ritual gave the attachment system permission to linger, to search, to say goodbye slowly rather than all at once. Your nervous system still wants that, and modern culture often does not give it to you. Think about the grief rituals that were standard practice across most of human civilization and have been abandoned in just the last century or two. In Victorian England, mourning was a structured social process that lasted years. Women wore black for up to 4 years after losing a husband. Men wore mourning armbands. There were rules about who you could see and when, what events you could attend, how publicly you could smile. Formal mourning periods gave the grieving person a visible social role. Everyone around them understood, this person is in grief, give them space, expect less from them, bring them food. In many Jewish traditions, the practice of Shiva creates a week of communal mourning where the bereaved sit in their home and the community comes to them. Neighbors and friends bring food, so the family does not have to cook. Visitors come and sit and simply be present, removing the exhausting demand to function, to perform normalcy, to manage other people's discomfort with your pain. In parts of rural Greece, women still gather to sing laments called moiroloia, improvised oral poems for the dead, sung collectively, sometimes for days after a death. Researchers who have documented these traditions describe women composing verses on the spot, addressing the dead directly, pouring the search into sound and language. The lament does not deny that the person is gone. It insists that the relationship continues, that the dead are still worth speaking to, still worth making music for. What all of these traditions have in common is time. They do not rush the nervous system through a process the nervous system was never designed to rush through. They create a container, a socially sanctioned space where the search for the lost person is not pathologized, not treated as excessive or morbid, but honored as the most human thing a person can do. And then the modern West largely dismantled that container. The bereavement leave in most workplaces is 3 to 5 days. The expectation to return to normal function arrives within weeks. The grief, with nowhere to go, turns inward, and sometimes turns destructive. The research on this gap is striking. Psychologist George Bonanno of Columbia University spent years studying how people actually grieve, as opposed to how clinical models said they should. What he found complicated everything. Some people experience prolonged and intense grief that stretches for years. Some recover surprisingly quickly without that meaning they loved less. Some oscillate, swinging between devastation and ordinary function. There is no single grief timeline that fits human experience. And yet most modern institutions behave as though there is one, and it is very short. Bonanno's work was not an argument for suppressing grief or speeding people through it. It was an argument for recognizing that the human nervous system is wildly variable, that grief takes the shape of the person and the relationship and cannot be standardized, and that rigid timelines imposed from the outside serve the institution, not the grieving person. Your body already knew this. That is why grief does not obey schedules. That is why it returns without warning 6 months or 3 years later, when you hear a certain song or smell something that brings a face rushing back into focus. The brain did not finish searching. It bookmarked the loss and returned to it when something triggered the old attachment circuit. This is not a sign that you are stuck. It is a sign that the bond was real. Ancient cultures built rituals around that return, not just around the initial loss, but around the ongoing reality of absence. In Japan, the Buddhist observance of Obon, held each August, is a time when the spirits of ancestors are believed to return to visit the living. Families light lanterns to guide them home, clean graves, set places at the table. The ritual is not about pretending the dead are alive. It is about making space for the ongoing relationship to breathe. In Mexico, the Dia de los Muertos weaves food, music, photographs, marigolds, and offerings into a days-long celebration that explicitly refuses to separate the living from the dead. The dead are invited back. They are fed their favorite things. They are spoken to. In West African Yoruba tradition, the dead become ancestors, not memories, but active presences, consulted, honored, spoken to regularly, included in decisions. The relationship does not end. It changes form. In each of these traditions, grief does not end. It transforms into something ongoing. The search the brain wants to run is given a formal, recurring outlet. The dead are not erased. They are integrated into the life of the living. Psychologist Dennis Klass, along with colleagues Phyllis Silverman and Stephen Nickman, challenged the dominant Western grief model in a landmark 1996 collection that introduced the concept of continuing bonds. Their research showed that maintaining a connection to the deceased, speaking to them, thinking of them as still present in some form, including them in ongoing life, was not a sign of unresolved grief, as Freudian models had long suggested. It was a sign of healthy adaptation. People who maintained these internal bonds tended to function well, to find meaning, to integrate the loss, rather than be paralyzed by it. The traditions that kept the dead close were not primitive superstition. They were psychologically sophisticated responses to a problem the human nervous system has always faced: how to continue living when someone essential is no longer there. Here's the counterintuitive truth that emerges from all of this. What you have been told grief should look like: acute, time-limited, ultimately resolved into a clean kind of closure, is a cultural artifact of a very particular historical moment. It is not what the human nervous system expects. It is not what most of human history practiced. The ancient world, across cultures that had no contact with each other, independently arrived at grief rituals that looked remarkably similar. Proximity to the dead, extended mourning periods, communal support, continued relationship with the deceased in symbolic form. They did not design these traditions from a psychology textbook. They built them because they worked, because the nervous system responded to them, because the ancient brain, which is also your brain, found relief in ceremony, in time, in the permission to keep loving someone who was no longer there to receive it. You still carry that brain, every cell of it. When grief hits you and you do not know what to do with it, when it feels shapeless and overwhelming, and you have no container to put it in, you are not broken. You are a very old creature trying to navigate a very new kind of world, one that has largely forgotten the rituals your nervous system was built to need. There is something worth sitting with in that. The next time you want to speak to someone who is gone, out loud to an empty room, do not stop yourself. The next time you want to set a place for them at the table, or carry something of theirs everywhere you go, or visit a place you shared just to feel close to them for a moment, or light a candle for no reason you can fully explain, recognize that impulse for what it is. Not irrationality, not pathology, not a failure to move on. It is continuity. It is the oldest grief ritual there is. And you are standing in a very long line of people who did exactly the same thing, all the way back to a dark cave in northern Spain, where someone who loved another person carried a beautiful pink stone deep into the earth and placed it with care beside a body that could no longer hold it, because leaving felt wrong, just like it does for you. And now you know. That feeling was never weakness. It was the most human thing about you, running exactly the way it was designed to run all along.